first learned about the concept of driver education events, it was like a life-altering revelation for me. I was at a Honda dealership and I was speaking to one of the gentlemen working there, and he started talking about how he was going to take his own car to the racetrack the next weekend. And I probably almost interrupted him and asked him to go back. What did you say? Did you say you're taking your own car to the racetrack? And he then explained a little bit more that, yeah, there was a race car track about an hour away. It was the local track and it was Summit Point. And you could take your car there, and for a weekend, you could drive your own car and drive around the track as fast as you wanted. When I first bought my Porsche 944, we were taking care of it, babying it like anyone will with a brand new car, especially a Porsche. And I remember when I was getting ready for my first DE event, I started thinking, I've been taking care of it, it's like my baby, and what if I damage it on the track? What if I drive it too hard? What if I, God forbid, put it into a wall at 100 miles an hour and just destroy the car? So I remember thinking that and just being a little nervous about it in the beginning before getting to the track. But then, once on the track, once getting comfortable and driving the car around the track, I remember very strongly thinking to myself, I do not care what damage I do to this car. This is so much fun. I have never had so much fun before, never done anything so thrilling before. I don't care what happens to this car. I will fix it and I will get back out on the track. So before you take your car out to your first driver education event, you're going to have the car technically inspected, and that's merely where you take it to a shop, a local repair shop, and have them fill out a form that the club that you're going to drive with gives you. And it's just making sure that the car is not going to fall apart on the track, that there's nothing wrong with the car, that everything's functioning properly. When you finally get to the track, you're then going to have the car inspected again at the morning of the first day of the track event. And again, they're just making sure that there's nothing obviously wrong with the car. They're making sure that the battery is bolted down, the lug nuts on the wheels are tight and torqued properly. They're making sure that there's no loose items in the car that could go flying around when you're driving around the turns of the racetrack. So once all that's complete, you'll have a little driver meeting to get everyone together, talk about the track, go over some safety precautions, and at that point you'll meet your instructor, get to know each other a little bit, and you'll typically have 4 sessions each day of your event where you're driving on the track for somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how many different run groups there are. So typically the beginners are in one run group. The people who have been driving a little bit longer are in a second run group. Then you have the drivers who drive by themselves in the car. They're in another run group. And then you have the advanced drivers who usually have dedicated track cars. They've been going to the track for years and they really know what they're doing. DE events are usually very calm, very safe, everything's structured very well, whereas a club race is just everyone fighting for the space on the track. And that's what makes it so exciting, is that you're going to be racing each other, but you have to share that space with other cars. So you're going to be going through the turns 2 cars wide sometimes because neither of you wants to give up the turn. And that differs from a DE event in which you typically let a car pass you and then you both enter the turn one after the other. To be eligible to compete in your first club race, you first have to have a checkout ride with a senior instructor at a driver education event. So for me, my checkout ride was at Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course, and it was a lot of fun because it was actually in the rain. So I had an additional challenge, and the chief instructor who was observing me, he actually asked a bunch of the other drivers in the run group to kind of drive around me, drive behind me, pass me, slow down so that I could pass them. And it was also that my instructor could observe me and see how aware I was of all the cars around me and see how well I let other cars pass me and how well I passed other cars, how safely I did this. Some of the car clubs that put on driver education events will require you to attend a high-performance driving clinic. A high-performance driver clinic differs from a DE event in that it's really breaking down the basics of driving on the track. You're going to review threshold braking and practice it. You're going to talk to a great extent about how to take a turn, and they really break everything down so that you completely understand how to drive on the track and how to safely maneuver through these turns. Everything they teach you at a high-performance driving clinic is what you'll be implementing at a DE event. So a DE event is typically you're jumping in the car and you're driving around the track. So it's good to have some basis, some experience before that by attending one of these high-performance driver clinics. A DE event varies in cost between roughly $250 to about $400 depending on the track, how big the track is, and how famous the track is. So in that price range, you're paying for typically 2 to 3 days of the track time, and each day consists of about 4 30-minute sessions of track time. Another option for DE events is signing up for just one day. If you just want to get a small taste of it without committing to a whole weekend. Usually you can pay for just the one day, 4 sessions, and I think that's what we did on our first event, so that we kind of crawled before we walked and just got a little taste of it before committing to a whole weekend. The costs for driving on the track can build as much as you want them to. You can take your own car to the track and just keep driving around the track, event after event, without any serious upgrades if you want to. You can leave the stock seats in the car, keep using the stock seat belts, and no one really says you have to make any serious upgrades to the car. But usually that's not the case. Usually you get to the track, you have an absolute blast, and all you want to do is go faster and faster. You want to take the turns faster, you want to brake harder, you want better brakes on the car, you want better suspension so the car is more planted through the turns, and we all say that you get bit by the bug and you just want to start spending money on that car because you love the sport so much and because you love driving on the track so much. When we first started doing DE events, we had a couple of people advise us that it's actually financially beneficial to buy an already prepped race car. And now, 5 years later, after spending several tens of thousands of dollars upgrading our car, I can see what they're talking about. Except, my wife and I have had so much fun and learned so much about our car by doing all the work ourselves. So if we had bought a car that was already prepared, we would learn about the car because we would have to perform some maintenance on the car. There's maybe some upgrades we would have to make. You know, you don't buy a car in perfect condition. So we would have learned and we would have saved a ton of money, but at the same time, this is all a hobby anyway. So we knew that we would be spending all this money on the upgrades and stuff, and we didn't have any regrets buying a completely stock car. We've enjoyed every step of the way. There's of course been some hang-ups, some little issues here and there, having to learn from scratch how to do everything, how to take certain parts out of the car, how to take an engine out of a car, but overall it's been very rewarding. 2 items that you're going to need for your first DE event is an approved helmet and a long sleeve shirt that is made out of 100% cotton. In conjunction with these 2 items, there's some other items that are always smart to have. A chalk for your tires, because when you come in off of the track, your brakes are going to be very hot and it's not advisable to use your brakes or engage the emergency brake until they've been allowed to cool off. So a chalk will allow you to keep the car in place and let your brakes cool off. Also, when you come in off the track, you're going to want to check your tire pressure. Tire pressures can get very, very high when driving at speed on the track. So often after the first few sessions, you'll have tire pressures that are a little too high, a little higher than you want them to be. You'll also want a torque wrench and the correct socket for your lug nuts. As you drive on the track, your lug nuts will loosen up just a little bit, and before each track session, you're going to want to tighten them back up to the specific torque setting for your car and your wheels. You'll also want to have some gloves. Some sort of driving glove is advisable because your hands will probably get sweaty, and this helps keep a better contact with the steering wheel so you can control the car a little better. It's always good to have a little extra engine oil on hand, just in case your engine happens to burn a little bit of oil, because you definitely want plenty of oil in your engine to keep it lubricated. Also, something to clean the glass, to clean your windshield is advisable. As you start going faster on the track, another good item to have is a Hans device. This is an item that comes up over your neck and around your shoulders, attaches to the back of your helmet, and keeps your head from snapping forward in a front-on collision. The Hans device is also necessary when entering into club racing. If you have a second set of tires that you're going to mount on the car once you're at the track, this would be a dedicated set of track tires. You're going to want to bring a jack stands, and an impact wrench. An impact wrench will definitely make the job of getting those lug nuts off much faster and getting them back on again much, much quicker. I was really looking forward to the weekend because I really wanted to see how I stacked up against the other drivers and how the car stacked up against the other drivers' cars. We knew that the car was low on horsepower, relatively speaking, so I knew that I had an uphill battle. So it was fun when I actually qualified position 7. So I started the first sprint race, P7, which was right in mid-pack because there was 13 cars in my group. So that was pretty cool. I was pretty happy with that. And at the beginning of that sprint race, I was able to make up a few positions, and I think I was able to get up to maybe about position 5. So right at the start, the car next to me, who was one position ahead of me, he was able to jump right ahead and jump in between the two cars in front of us. So I think he had radio communications with someone along pit lane. So he got really good notification that the green flag had dropped at the beginning of the race. He jumped up a few positions, and then I was track left, or driver's left, going down the front straight, and then between the first turn and maybe the 6th or 7th turn of the first lap, I was able to get past at least 2 drivers, and then over the next couple of laps, I was actually able to get up to, I think, 5th place, and after just barely passing one of the other really good competitors. And it was when I was trying to hold off that other competitor that I missed a gear when I was shifting from 2nd into 3rd, so I didn't quite get it into 3rd, over-revved the engine, and I noticed that a loss of horsepower in conjunction with the fact that I'd missed the gear. So that competitor was able to pass me on the left-hand side, and with him, 2 more cars passed me on the left-hand side. So I knew something was wrong. I mean, you miss a gear and sure, one guy will pass you, but for 2 guys behind that guy to pass you, something's going on. So I started looking at the gauges, and the oil pressure looked like it was just slightly low. And so I kept racing, but then 2 more cars were able to pass me. And at that point, I knew something was wrong because I had been keeping all of them well behind me for the first 5 or 6 laps, however long it was. And then I really felt the lack of horsepower. I was really having trouble getting up to speed, getting up to where it was time to shift into the next gear. And then I also saw that the oil pressure had dropped even more. And so after completing another lap of just limping around the track in order to get back to pit lane, I made the decision to bring the car in. It wasn't worth it. I was completely out of the running. Everyone had passed me on the track, and I could just do more damage to the car and to the engine if I pushed it out there. So unfortunately, I had to come in and end the session early and end the sprint race early. So that was kind of unfortunate, but for those first 5 or 6 laps, it was pretty exciting, and I was pretty happy with my progress and what I was able to accomplish. When I lost horsepower and oil pressure during that sprint race, I almost was in disbelief, or I almost didn't want it to be true. I wanted to finish the sprint race more than anything. I wanted to complete at least one of them. So it was extremely frustrating, and I almost had to come to terms with it during that last lap when I had to make the decision to come in. That I almost had to tell myself, like, that's it, you're not in the running anymore. If there's something wrong with the car, obviously, you got to come in. You can't finish the race. So that was really disappointing, but I knew that was something to be expected. And it had actually been the first time, maybe in 5 or 6 years of being on the track, that I'd ever really had a problem like that I had to come in before a session was over. So I mean, in that regard, I was fortunate, but it couldn't have come at a worse time. So when I got the car in and parked it, turned it off very quickly, I just was really just hoping that we could find the symptom quickly and easily and get it fixed and resolved, and I could make it out for the next sprint race. Because there was still one more sprint race that day, and then another sprint race the next day, and the endurance. So that's all I was thinking about was, oh God, I hope it's something minor that we can fix. It's going to be something like that. You know, guys usually can get their cars back on track in the same day when something goes wrong. So when our mechanic Jay of Dark Horse Motorsport took a look underneath the hood, we had a few friends there, and everyone was kind of doing their best, really just jumping in. We had a couple of friends that had just happened to come to the track that day who were good with 944s, such as John Graves, and they were all just kind of put their knowledge together, their ideas together, and really tried to diagnose what was wrong with the car. And unfortunately, the tapping noise that was happening when hitting the accelerator just a little bit, just at like even 1200 RPMs, obviously something was really wrong with the engine, but nobody could really precisely diagnose what it was. So that's when the decision was made to bring the car back to Dark Horse Garage and let Jay try and figure out what was wrong with it in the confines of his garage and all his tools and his shop. I had a little bit of trouble sleeping that night while waiting to hear back from our mechanic Jay about whether the car was going to be running for the next day, whether I was going to be on track and racing for the third sprint race and the Enduro. So I remember just waking up just a little early in the morning, and I heard the notification that I had text messages, and took a look, and it basically stated that Jay had spent 13 hours working on the car, taking off the top end of the engine, draining the fluids, replacing the head with a brand new head from Just Joshin 944 parts, and then putting everything back together after also looking at valves, springs, lifters, and Jay and Mike put the engine back together, put all the fluids back in there, went to start it up, and that same noise was happening. So that's what the text messages told me, and said we won't be able to get the car to the track this morning. So at that point it was, I knew they had done their best. They had tried their best. They did everything that they could in the time allotted, and it was just one of those things that the rest of the weekend just wasn't going to happen. And it was like a punch in the gut, but I know that Jay and Mike gave it their all, and especially with the help of John, and they did what they could. We had an engine rebuild in the works over the winter anyway, so we had wanted to do one more DE event before the end of the season, but it looks like we're just going to scratch that and take our time, rebuild the engine. It was a tired old engine anyway. It had only been refreshed by myself and my brother and wife, so it really needed to be rebuilt, and that's what we had in the works anyway. So that's the plan, to rebuild the engine with optimal horsepower so that next year when we race again, I'll know that the car is in optimum condition, the engine's putting out optimum horsepower, so that to be competitive, I know that it's just going to be about me and my driving skill. And that's really all that I'm going to be looking forward to until the first club race next season. I'd like to give a special thanks to everyone who supported my club race and to the making of this film. Carl Podel of Racer's Edge, OG Racing, Flying Horse Motorsport, and especially Rhino's Rub and the team that provided our on-site catering at the track. It was a lot of fun, and we hope to do it again. I'd like to especially thank everyone that jumped in and lent a hand and tried to help us diagnose what the issue was with the car after that first sprint race. Phil from SSI was a huge help. John Graves of Just Joshin 944 Parts was able to provide us a free head, which was a huge contribution that he didn't have to do. I'd also like to thank Dimmy of Flying Horse Motorsport for his support. Brian Walsh for his mentoring during the club race. It was a lot of help, and I couldn't have done as well as I did without his assistance and his wealth of knowledge. I'd like to thank everyone who lent us a GoPro. We were able to put together about 7 GoPros that were mounted throughout the car and contributed to all the great footage that we were able to capture. Lastly, I'd like to thank Jay and Mike of Dark Horse Motorsport, who made the final preparations to the race car and who provided all of our on-track support and worked tirelessly through the night for 13 hours straight to try and get the car back together so that I could race on Sunday. It didn't ultimately happen, but I know they tried their best, and their sole mission for those 13 hours was to get that car back together. Thank you.